This morning's hearing relates to the subject of ebonics, which is a term derived from ebony, black, and phonic sound. There has been considerable discussion, really controversy, and concerns as to whether ebonics is a separate language and as such undesirable, or whether it is a teaching skill and a bridge for some to perfect and learn language skills.
I think ebonics is absurd. This is a political correctness that simply has gone out of control.
Many of the children who come to us have language systems that are not consistent with standard English. We have not taken a position as to whether it is a language. We simply acknowledge that these systems exist.
If you're taught, as you are in a society like this one, that default English is what I'm doing right here, then anything else seems lesser. It seems like it's, well, just a dialect, as people put it. So, real language is in the Wall Street Journal. Then there's all this other stuff that's only spoken, and, you know, it's in hip-hop, and, well, they keep using bad words, and so especially that one. Black English especially. That's no good. That's not real. So it's the responsibility of somebody like me to explain how many sophisticated things are going on in this supposedly broken down speech. My name is John McWhorter. I teach linguistics at Columbia University. I host the podcast Lexicon Valley, and I'm a contributing editor at The Atlantic. Linguistics is the study not so much of what people say, but how they say it. It's the scientific study of language. It's an umbrella term. You know, the idea that there's a white way of speaking and a black way of speaking can sound like what someone like me is saying is that at first everybody talked one way and then black people ran off into a corner and started talking in their own way, and damn it, why don't they stop that? It wasn't anything like that. Really, it's this. Black English is English because Black English is spoken here and we're around so many English speakers. But it is something that has lasted a very long time. It is something now that has a whole history of transmogrification over the centuries. It is something that has informed what is the world's most popular music. Why in the world are people using Black English terms in New Guinea? I've heard it. I have heard people in New Guinea who don't speak a word of English, but are rapping in whatever they're rapping in. And there are all sorts of words and little phrases that are from Black English spoken in the United States. They'll never meet a black person. Or if I met them, I was the one they'll ever meet. That's it. And this is going on in China. That's a pretty amazing thing, given where Black English started. The origins of Black English start with the fact that Africans are brought to the United States, and big surprise, they don't speak English at first. Africa has its own languages. And so what do? When nobody is invested in teaching you the language, there's no such thing as language lessons, there's no Berlitz, there's no Rosetta Stone, you're there to work. So what happens, especially if you're over about 15 or 16? You're going to learn English by hook or crook, but it's not going to be perfect English because after a certain point, human beings almost never can learn languages perfectly. And then also, who are you learning English from? The whites who these slaves worked alongside, often those indentured servants that you learn about or don't learn about in school, or even just people running the plantation who are very poor, lower class white people themselves. What kind of English are you going to hear? Not the English that I'm speaking right now. So the slaves were learning English from people who used many different grammatical constructions than anybody who was speaking standard American English, to the extent that that existed at the time. So what you had was dialects of English that we're not used to, being learned, but not completely, by grown-up people who have a lot to do other than, studying English closely. And the result was an English that mixes aspects of various, to us, obscure dialects of English, and gives some of them a close shave and leaves out some of the things that aren't necessary. So, for example, if you hear somebody say, he, your brother, there's no lack of understanding. The verb to be is not there, but about every other language in the world does it that way anyway. And so, given the fact that the verb to be in English is really complicated, am, is, are, contraction, if you're learning English on the fly, you're going to leave that out. So that goes. There's a little collection of things like that in Black English that make it sound like it's just a whole bunch of mistakes. When really what it is making English make more sense than it does. And then a lot of the other things that sound exotic in Black English are really just Irish English. It's the English of Western England, places like Cornwall and Devon. It's sometimes things from up in Yorkshire, stuff that we don't hear unless we're real fans of British television and movies. And even then, you have to listen very closely to catch most of this stuff. And so Black English is really interesting. It sounds to very many Americans like just a bunch of mistakes. What it really is something exotic and fascinating. It is a linguistic victory. And on top of all that, this is the fun thing about Black English. You have adults, they don't learn every single bit of what they're hearing, and what they leave out is the stuff that frankly shouldn't have been there anyway. Take a vowel, hold it in your hands, roll it around, pat it on the head, and then place it gently on the floor and watch where it goes. Imagine that vowel as a living thing. A vowel. Let's make that vowel ah. Ah is going to move. Ah is a living thing. Ah is a cat. Ah can move and it can become ah. Ah could move, and instead of being ah, it can become o. There are these places ah can move. It's like chess. In one dialect, ah is going to go off and become ah. In some other dialect, it might become ah too. But in a third dialect, it's going to become o. And so, next thing you know, you're calling something that meows a cot. As time goes by, it's a cat. That actually happened. But then on the other hand, it could be that there's something that you're calling a ston that you hold in your hand and throw at the wall. And after a while, you're calling it a stone. That happened too. Vowels move in different directions. If people are not living together or they're not thinking together, their vowels move in different places. The result is the black sound. Now, you could call it the result is the white sound. You can say that it's the black people who stood still, but the vowels are not going to be in the same place. Black English gets made fun of as this Ebonics that's all about cutting things up and leaving things off. There are all these hidden complexities in Black English that make it even fiercer than it would be otherwise. And so we're here up in the house, you hear somebody say, and you think, oh, that little silly slang. And then you think, well, maybe up because maybe the club is upstairs and maybe the DJ is up on a stand. And frankly, you're busy, you don't think about it. Up is just some stupid slang. But then if you listen more closely, you hear people saying all sorts of things. I knew a guy who I knew he lived on the ground floor, and he was talking about a party he had had the week before, and he said, there's buck-naked people up in my house. And his house wasn't up anything. I don't think there was even a basement. And yet he said that. And that's a hair out of place, and then you figure, well, maybe he doesn't know what up is. But then another time I heard somebody saying, you know, I ain't got no food up in my house. Once again, I was thinking, you live downstairs. And so after a while, you realize that the up is not up anything. And if you listen and you listen, and this is what linguistics is. You can be studying Bulgarian. You're doing the same thing. You're trying to find the sense in what seems like chaos. Up. If you listen to the way people use it, you also have to listen to the way people don't use it. Nobody would say, they're on the phone, they say, well, give me a chance to come get you. Right now, I'm up at the dentist's and I can't get you now. No, even if the dentist was on the 37th floor, you wouldn't say you were up at the dentist. Why? Because you don't want to be at the dentist. That up is a marker of intimacy. The reason people say up in that way, that Black English has up in that way, is because there is this explicit piece of grammar that indicates that you have a warm feeling towards wherever you're talking about. I remember another woman saying, I was getting used to being up in the bed. Now, maybe she had one of those tall beds, but that's not what she meant. She meant that you're comfortable in bed. That's intricate because standard English doesn't have that. You might say something like, well, we're here in the house and we're quite comfortable. Or it'll be something like, well, I was getting used to being in the bed, all nice and cozy, or something. But Black English has just the up. Multiply that by like 25, and you've got all sorts of things that show that the idea that Black English is just broken is an artifact of the fact that all we know to listen for is whether or not somebody's conjugating one particular verb. There is a whole lot more to the speech form than that. The reason that Black English has thrived the way it has, and the reason that varieties of it still survive, despite the fact that, especially since emancipation in 1863, there's been so much contact between white and Black people of a social kind, and ever more. You might expect that Black English would have disappeared because everybody's talking together, but it doesn't happen, and that's because people subconsciously reflect how they feel, who they feel closest to, what they identify with in aspects of their speech. That's especially in terms of the sounds that you make when you talk, how you shape your vowels. That's also true in terms of subtle aspects of your grammar. Now, there's a romantic way of putting this which says that people, and it's not only Black people who are described this way, but people express their identities deliberately by making their language different from others. That's true of slang. You're going to use different words for this thing or that thing out of a sense that we are not them. You know, we all know teenagers do that. But when you're getting to most of language, and frankly, the part of language that is the most interesting because it's harder to get a handle on, the sounds, the grammar, the order that you put words in. Nobody's thinking of that consciously. It's a magnificently subconscious process where people speak differently because you talk the way the people who you're most comfortable with talk. And so Black English ends up staying the way it is because Black people love each other more than they love other people, which I think is a pretty innocent thing. And the glory of it is that Black English, this is the question that any teacher about Black English gets from somebody who raises their hand in the back of the room. For some reason, they're always male. For some reason, it's usually a white person. Let's say that his name is Tyler. Tyler is going to ask, well, is Black English different from place to place? Shouldn't there be different dialects of Black English? And I always say, yes, there are, but those dialects are nevertheless amazingly similar. There's a certain basic grammatical pattern that has stayed more or less the way it is for at least 150 years. And that's because there is, even on a subconscious level, a cross-continental Black community. And so it's an amazing thing that it persists the way it does. And the only way that it would disappear would be if there really were no color line on any level. So anybody who wants to say that we should be past race because people live next door to each other and there's some Black CEOs, well, no, there are richer issues than that. And one way you know it is because Black people don't talk like white people and white people don't talk like Black people. To the extent that increasingly white people talk like Black people, and that's something that there are many differing opinions about, but especially if you get a little older, like I'm of course not old, but being 55, I can say that I have seen over the past 25 years a Blackish way of talking among many white people that didn't exist among very hip white people in the 1980s. One of the dangers of Black English being thought of as lesser is that a child who speaks Black English in class may be thought of as indicating lesser intelligence, or simply as being in need of constant correction, even at a young age, which, big surprise, can turn a person off from the scholastic endeavor. A problem can be that if a person speaks Black English or has what you might call a Black accent, that they will be less likely to get an apartment or even a job when a phone interview is involved. And then there's also an issue, which is that court stenographers have been shown to have a tendency to mistranscribe aspects of Black English in some cases that actually affect how that person is going to be seen, treated, and sentenced. And so it's the job of anybody who represents Black English to make it clear that things like this need to be attended to. And people doing that kind of thing often complain that society never seemed to get the message. One ray of sunshine is that social media, for all of the damage that it does in many ways, gets messages out better. And my sense of things is that the idea that Black English is not broken language, the idea that we need to beware discriminating against people because they sound Black over the phone or over the internet, all of those messages get out better and more widely and more resonantly now than they used to. My sense is that the podcast in particular gets things into people's heads better than any printed page ever did. So I'm optimistic that America can grow up linguistically to a certain extent. All human speech is equally expressive. All human speech can convey equal amounts of nuance. So I would just say that Black English is equally efficient, equally subtle to any kind of standard English. And given what our people went through, the fact that there are these nearly unrecognizable Englishes spoken all over the world is a kind of linguistic victory. And if there ever will be a youth lingua franca for real, it's going to be this thing that was created by African slaves in the 16 and 1700s. Here we are. I am very happy to have grown up listening to that speech, to be interested in that speech, to be part of that speech. You should be too.